Hi, welcome you all to session number 6. In today's session, we'll be discussing about some of the defining living characteristics. In the previous class, we have discussed already about two defining characteristics. One of the defining character, what we discussed was related to growth. Then now we are moving on to the next part of the discussion is about reproduction. What is reproduction? We know reproduction is a very important physiological or a biological mechanism in which the species has to produce offspring of its own. So in the reproduction, there are two categories of organisms. That is, organism which is undergoing asexual reproduction and organism which is undergoing sexual mode of reproduction. Why reproduction is necessary? Reproduction is necessary for continuity of life. Life has to move on. That is, life has to move on from one generation to the next generation. For this purpose, reproduction is essential. Now, how does we say a reproduction is a defining character or not a defining character? That is what we'll be discussing in today's session. So in the previous session, we have seen with respect to growth. So we got a conclusion that growth is therefore not a defining property of living organisms because even non-living objects also do grow. That is, they exhibit external accumulation of growth, but whereas in living system, it is internal development which takes place. But now, in the case of a reproduction, how can we define that? If organisms undergoing a asexual mode of reproduction, we get to see that it is the involvement of only single parental system. In the single parental system, we call whatever the offsprings which are produced, the offsprings which are produced in this, let us take example of a binary fission in case of amoeba. So here I will give the term as clones. Clones is an appropriate term which is given for the asexual mode of reproduction, where you have the parental organism which divides to form two daughter cells. That means here there is no involvement of any spindle fibers or any mitotic apparatus for the division to take place in case of amoeba. Amoeba, bacteria, or many organisms will undergo the fission process, that too in specific binary fission. There are different types of fission. Multiple fission also is one of the category where Plasmodium, I think you must heard about the malarial parasite Plasmodium. This particular malarial parasite Plasmodium which undergoes multiple fission. Now, how it is different? Here you can see the daughter ones which are produced will be identical. There is no difference. Since they are genetically and morphologically they'll be different, we call such condition as clones. Now, taking this information about asexual reproduction, here one more important point we need to understand is there is no variations at all. You can see whatever the amoeba which is produced a daughter cell, it is just like the parental cell. Are there any differences? No, there is no variation because there is no biparental system. That is, there is no exchange of gametic changes takes place. Whereas in the case of sexual mode of reproduction, it is a biparental system where there is fusion of the sperm and that of the egg. Once there's a fusion of the sperm and the egg, that is nothing but formation of zygote. Now, technically, if you have to call sexual reproduction, it is called as amphimixis. Amphimixis is a term given for sexual mode of reproduction because mixes, that is two. That is male gamete, that is egg or the ovum, having 23 chromosomes. The sperm or the egg, which is having 23 chromosomes. The sperm and the egg will fuse together to form a zygote. A zygote which will have 46 chromosomes. This 46 chromosome is nothing but the product of amphimixis. Now this zygote will develop into an embryo and the embryo into an organism. That means the reproduction in case of sexual organisms, it is a biparental system. And second thing is, in case of sexual reproduction, it is basically, you can get to see a lot of variation because fusion is happening between two different genetic components. That is how we can differentiate between asexual mode of reproduction and that of the sexual mode of reproduction. Now, moving on to the next thing. Let us see in different organisms how reproduction generally happens. Let us take the example of a fungi. In case of fungi, they multiply and spread easily to they produce a type of spores called spores. You can see here a particular structure which is shown, which is a rhizopus. Rhizopus is commonly called as the bread mold on the bread. If you leave a bread untouched for many days, what will happen? It will start producing the spores. You can see a black mat-like structure which is generally produced by the help of spores. And these spores are generally product of meiotic division. That means they would have undergone a meiotic division. Because of the meiotic division, you are able to see the spore formation here. Now, whatever spores which are produced, these spores will have capacity to undergo, they disperse either through air currents or through water currents. So this is called sporangium. This particular diagram which you can see here is called sporangium. So within the sporangium, these asexual spores are produced inside. And these asexual spores will disperse out and that will germinate and develop into new individuals. That is how the mode of reproduction takes place in case of fungi. You can see the black mat as I was discussing about the bread mold. On the mat surface, you can see a blackish mat-like structure. Those are nothing but called individual mycelium. So if they have a capacity, they will just get dispersed with the help of a wind, through wind. They just go fall on other surface, and wherever because they are achlorophyllous and they are saprophytic organism, definitely on the dead and decayed substances, these spore formation takes place. And these spores are nothing but the product of meiotic division. That means they undergo meiosis. So in the previous class also have discussed there are two types of spores. One is called the mitospores, the other one is called the meiospores. The mitospores are the end product of mitosis, whereas meiospores are the product of meiosis. This is one way. Now let us go on to the second example in lower organisms. If we take lower organisms like yeast and hydra, you can see in case of yeast and hydra, you can find a outgrowth. Let us take a yeast. The best example here is shown. It's about the budding. What is happening? You can see once the conditions are suitable, the mature yeast cell is there, which starts producing a protrusion. So protrusion extends out like this. This is formed. This is called as the budding. So this part of the extension or growth is nothing but called budding. Now, once it will start detaching, it will start forming a nucleus. Also, will start dividing. You can see the nucleus which is dividing, which will get distributed to both the daughter cells equally. So now you have got the two daughter cells which you can see. So these two daughter cells are nothing but the product of binary fission. So this is one of the mode of reproduction which we can see in yeast as well as in hydra. The next example is the fungi and the filamentous algae. So in this case of organism, so you have something called the protonema of mosses. Protonema is nothing but it is a particular stage in case of mosses. We have adult leafy stage and the protonema stage. And this will easily develop, this will easily get fragmented. So suppose fragmentation is happening. They have shown the steps here. The end walls grows inward. You can see the growing happening which is inward. This is happening inward. So after this, the ingrowth will enlarge. You can see the enlargement and the filament breaks and the fragments will get separated. So by this, there's one more fragment which is formed here. And there's one more fragment which is formed here. So you can find two fragments which are getting separated. So this process of fragmentation, so here also one more organism will start developing. So this entire process is nothing but called as the fragmentation process. So we are able to see that different organisms are able to bring about the mode of reproduction. I hope these concepts are clear with respect to reproduction. Now, moving on to the next thing. We should understand that this is in the case of lower organisms. What about in case of higher organisms? What does it happen? Now, in the case of unicellular organisms like bacteria or algae, So they reproduce with the growth, that is increase number of cells. It is vice versa. That means once the conditions are suitable for them, they grow in size. So definitely there is a division and number of cells also increases. In single cell organism, we are not very clear about the usage of two terms, growth and reproduction. Yes. Why? Because all the unicellular organisms are immortal. What is immortal? They don't have something called death. They just reproduce, they just divide, and they develop into the new one. And that will develop into two daughter cells. That's it. So in this case, you are not able to see anything something like which will die. There's no death. So that's why most of the unicellular organisms like amoeba and algae, they are immortal in nature. Now he says we're not clear about growth and reproduction. So there's no definition of or definite term to distinguish between the growth and reproduction. They almost are undergoing the same way of mechanism. That is, they grow. Once they grow in a particular size, once conditions are suitable, they just divide. So that's why growth and reproduction are not coinciding terms with respect to unicellular organisms. Now, there are many organisms which do not reproduce at all. Let us take, there are two examples which I have shown here. You can see the two examples which are shown with respect to a horse and that of a donkey. So you have made a cross between two. That is, you have a horse. Horse is commonly given a name as Equus caballus, and a donkey, Equus acerus. So we have two different species here, but belonging to the same genera. So when we fuse between these two, when we make a cross between these two animals, we are getting a mule. A mule is a sterile individual. So they'll not be able to bring about any further process of fertilization or production of offspring is not seen. And similarly, we have one more example here. There's one more thing which I need to mention about this is this type of cross. This type of cross is nothing but called as interspecific hybridization. This kind of a cross made between a horse and a donkey for the production of the mule. We call this condition as interspecific hybridization. Now here you can see one more example which is quoted here. In this example also you can see a queen, drone and workers. So whatever the honeybees which are produced, here also these individuals are also produced, these are also having a sterile condition. So when they are, this sterility is based on two things. So if the whatever egg is undergone the fertilization, then it is not a sterile. If there is no fertilization, without fertilization, if the organism develops, we call them as sterile. And they'll be unable to reproduce further. So hence, reproduction also cannot be all inclusive defining character of living organisms. Because in the living system only, we have some organisms undergoing reproduction and some organism is not exhibiting any sort of reproduction. So when we don't have this kind of scenario, we can say this is also, of course, non-living objects is also capable of undergoing reproduction. So this is all. So hence we can conclude from this is reproduction is not also a defining character of living organism. Even growth is also not a defining character of living organism. Then what is next then? Metabolism. So what is a metabolism? Metabolism is nothing but some total of chemical reaction occurring in our body. So that is called as the metabolism, total reactions. So let us take an isolated metabolic reaction outside the body of an organism performed in a test tube. It is not a living thing, but surely a living reaction takes place. So metabolism is a defining feature of all the living organisms without exception. You take photosynthesis. That means the second point exemplification here is you take a test tube, you build up apparatus of photosynthesis, you supply artificial light to them. When you supply artificial light to them, they will be able to bring about photosynthesis, and various experiments have been done based on this. So this is the best example to talk about the metabolism which is happening outside the body. At the same way, the plants are able to bring about metabolism inside the system. So here I have shown few pictures which will talk about how the metabolism can be established. You can see catabolism and anabolism are the two different forms of metabolism. In case of anabolism, in the previous class I mentioned, it is nothing but it's a process of build-up process. You are building up the process for manufacturing of the ATP, and whatever ATP it has been utilized, you're going to break down, you're going to utilize during the catabolic reaction. So anabolism is a build-up process. Best example is photosynthesis, whereas catabolism is a breakdown process. The best example is respiration. So metabolism is a defining feature of all the living organisms without exception. Yes, so we can conclude that metabolism is a defining feature because even under an outside condition, under non-living conditions also, they are able to bring about metabolic activity. You can do this experiment artificially and you can prove it. And inside the body, definitely all the metabolic reactions are happening and under the control of certain enzymes. So this is very much important point which we need to remember. That means without the involvement of enzymes, you cannot expect the metabolism to take place. That is a conclusion we can draw from metabolism. Then we have the next one is very important thing is consciousness. All living organisms have the ability to sense with the surroundings and respond to this environmental stimulus. Suppose someone, as I mentioned, someone comes and stands behind you, immediately you respond to that particular person who's standing there. Or you take the otherwise, we have a snake in the room, immediately we run away from that particular place. That is also one of the consciousness. We have that particular response to that environmental stimulus, whatever stimulus we get. That response stimulus is nothing but called as irritability. We sense our environment over sense organs. We have well-defined sense organs. We have a sense organ for a taste. We have a sense organ for hearing. We have sense organs for seeing. So all organisms are aware of the surroundings. This is called consciousness. You can ask me, how about plants? The plants also do respond. So there's something called Mimosa pudica, touch-me-not plant. In the case of touch-me-not plant, they have something called the tug of pressure, which is responsible for touching of the leaf. The moment you touch the leaf, there's a tugger movement which takes place, which leads to closure of the leaf. The leaf will immediately close. So what does it mean? That means the plant is able to respond to a particular consciousness, to the irritability, whatever is happening. And always consciousness can be physical consciousness, or it could be some chemical reaction, or it could be even the biological reaction. The moment you smell a food, a yummy food is smelled, immediately your mouth, the saliva starts secreting in salivary amylase will start secreting in your mouth. That's a biological mechanism. You have various chemicals also which induces some allergic reaction to the body. That means you are sensing. That means your stimulus is active. So all these are some of the defining properties. Consciousness is also can be said as a defining property. So here consciousness therefore becomes the defining property of living beings. So here you can see three pictures which I have focused. On the first picture, it is nothing but your Mimosa pudica plant. The moment you touch the plant, immediately it will close. It's an indication of it's a tugger movement which is happening here. The second picture which you can see the Venus flytrap. The moment insect sits on a particular plant, immediately it will close. The leaf lamina of the leaf, it will sit, immediately it will close. What is it indication? The indication of this is it's nothing but the plant is able to respond to this particular stimulus. In the third diagram, in the third picture, you can see the consciousness of human beings. Whatever the stimulus you are getting, your brain is able to respond to it. So this is only one of the defining character of living organisms. I hope you are understanding this. Yes. Now, interactions. All the living phenomena are underlying due to interaction. We have interaction with one another or not? Yes, we have. Whatever let us take the circulation, digestion, your excretion, everything is interacted in a very good manner. The properties of tissue are not present in the constituent of cell, but arises as a result of interaction among the constituent cells. fantastic property. All the tissues which we have, they all are having a mutual interaction with each other. The similar properties of cellular organelle are not present in the molecular constituents of organelle, but arise as a result of interaction among molecular components. That means there are some carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids which will bring about that interaction between the organisms. Yes, so what we have understood in today's class, there are different modes of type characteristics which we can say defining property. First one is growth, second one is homeostasis, constant maintenance of internal environment, third reproduction, fourth consciousness. So out of these four, we have two, that is consciousness and also metabolism. Out of this, we have consciousness and also the what to say, the consciousness is one of the most important among all the defining properties if you compare any other defining character of organisms. So with this, we would like to conclude today's session. See you in the next session. Till then, take care of yourself. Thank you. Bye.